The city slept under a blanket of humid pre-dawn stillness, the kind that presses down on Los Angeles just before the desert heat begins its slow crawl across the basin. Streetlights cast lonely cones of yellow onto asphalt, still warm from yesterday's sun. In this manufactured quiet, a plain, unremarkable van ghosted through the empty streets. Its headlights extinguished its engine a low, barely perceptible hum against the silence. It navigated the shadowed arteries of the industrial district, finally rolling to a gentle stop near the imposing concrete facade of the Apex Security Transit Facility, a fortress guarding rivers of cash that flowed through the city's veins. Inside the van, the air was thick with unspoken tension, sharp metallic tangs of adrenaline and the faint scent of stale coffee. 5 figures sat shrouded in darkness, their faces etched with a mixture of fierce determination and gnawing anxiety. Eyes sharp and accustomed to the gloom, scanned the uninviting walls of the facility. Minds raced, replaying checklists, contingencies, escape routes. This wasn't some smash and grab, no desperate improvisation. This was the culmination. The crescendo of months spent in clandestine meetings, poring over stolen blueprints, timing guard patrols down to the second memorizing codes that changed like seasons. Tonight was the performance, the grand, audacious symphony they had meticulously composed in secret. They weren't after petty cash or jewelry. Behind those reinforced steel doors, beneath layers of surveillance and security protocols, lay the kind of money that could rewrite futures, erase pasts, buy silence and invisibility. Millions upon millions stacked bundled, waiting for redistribution. Untouched, vulnerable if you knew exactly where and when to cut, but the margin for error was non-existent. A single misplaced footstep, a cough caught on camera, a flicker of doubt at the wrong moment, and the carefully constructed edifice of their plan would shatter, bringing the full weight of federal law crashing down upon them. A faint click broke the silence as the van's side door slid open. One by one, they emerged, melting into the deeper shadows clinging to the building's periphery. They moved with an unnatural grace, like specters summoned for a singular, irreversible purpose. This was the precipice, the point of no return. They had rehearsed in their minds 1,000 times. If they succeeded, their names, or rather the legend of their anonymous feat, would echo in the annals of criminal history. If they failed, failure wasn't an option they allowed themselves to contemplate. Tonight, everything was on the line. Leo Vance was not your typical Apex Security Transit employee. On the surface, he was the definition of dependable mediocrity, punctual, diligent, quiet. He possessed an uncanny ability to fade into the background, a human chameleon who absorbed details while appearing utterly unremarkable. He performed his duties as a regional safety inspector with quiet competence, his reports thorough, his demeanor unassuming. Few who exchanged brief nods with him in the sterile hallways suspected the restless, calculating ambition churning beneath that placid exterior. His role, ironically, was to identify and mitigate the very vulnerabilities he now intended to exploit. It granted him a level of access most employees could only dream of. Keys, codes, intimate knowledge of the building's security nervous system. In Leo's hands, this trust became a weapon, the master key to a vault far richer than the one holding cash. It was the key to escaping the suffocating predictability of his life. Leo's upbringing in the sprawling, sun-baked landscape of Los Angeles hadn't been one of privilege but of observation. He understood the currents of desperation and aspiration that flowed beneath the city's glittering surface. Friends from his youth remembered him as sharp, resourceful, someone who could navigate complexities and lead quietly but effectively. He carried an intensity just below the surface, a simmering discontent with the hand life had dealt him. The steady paycheck, the mind-numbing routine, the endless loop of the 9 to 5. It chafed against the grander vision he held for himself. He yearned for significance, for the kind of freedom that only substantial wealth could buy. This yearning curdled slowly but surely into obsession. The more he studied Apex's security protocols, ostensibly to improve them, the more he saw hairline fractures, potential bypasses, human weaknesses woven into the technological fabric. The blueprints he reviewed became treasure maps. The guard schedules he analyzed became windows of opportunity. The idea, initially a fleeting, dangerous fantasy, began to solidify, taking root in the fertile ground of his dissatisfaction. He would rob the company that paid him to protect it. This wasn't a crime of passion or impulse. It was a meticulously crafted equation. Leo spent months in quiet contemplation, turning the problem over and over in his mind, examining every variable, every potential point of failure. He knew the layout of the Los Angeles facility like the back of his hand. He knew the precise timing of shift changes, the brief intervals when guards took breaks, the specific locations where camera coverage momentarily lapsed. He understood the intricate mechanics of the vault's multi-stage locking system. He'd even discreetly noted security codes observed, habits logged, patterns. His position wasn't just access, it was unparalleled reconnaissance. He realized that with perfect timing, absolute precision, and a team he could trust, implicitly, the fortress was breachable. The millions were attainable. But even Leo, with his intricate knowledge, couldn't pull this off alone. He needed hands, eyes, and nerves of steel, individuals bound to him by something stronger than shared greed. Loyalty, history. He turned to the men he'd grown up with, the ones who'd stood beside him through scraped knees, teenage triumphs, and the quiet struggles of early adulthood. They were his anchors in the often turbulent waters of South LA. They trusted his judgment, his ability to see angles others missed. His first call was to Marcus Cole. Marcus was Leo's oldest friend. Their bond forged in the crucible of shared childhood experiences, solid, dependable, with an innate understanding of how to move unseen and unheard. Marcus was the bedrock. He listened intently as Leo sketched the audacious outlines of the plan, his initial disbelief slowly giving way to a grudging respect for the sheer audacity and then a spark of shared ambition. With Marcus on board, the nucleus formed. With Marcus Cole as his first confidant, the audacious plan began to feel less like a solitary obsession and more like a tangible possibility. Together in hushed conversations held in dimly lit bars or during long drives through the sprawling city, anonymity, they began the critical process of building the rest of the team. Leo knew this was perhaps the most crucial phase. A single weak link, one person prone to panic or loose lips, could doom them all. Trust wasn't just important, it was the currency upon which their lives would depend. They needed a wheelman, someone who knew the labyrinthine streets of Los Angeles, not just by map, but by instinct. Someone who could navigate the city's clogged arteries and hidden capillaries under pressure, making a large anonymous U-Haul truck disappear into the urban fabric. The name that surfaced was Ray Donovan. Ray wasn't a career criminal, but he drove for a living, delivery trucks, sometimes long-haul rigs. He possessed an intimate, almost topographical knowledge of LA's shortcuts, industrial back alleys, and traffic patterns at all hours. More importantly, Ray was loyal, grounded, and owed Leo a favor from years back. When approached, Ray's initial reaction was wide-eyed disbelief, followed by a cautious curiosity that Leo and Marcus carefully nurtured. The lure of life-changing money combined with the assurance of Leo's meticulous planning eventually tipped the scales Ray was in. Next, they needed someone with a head for details, a mind capable of synchronizing the complex moving parts of the operation. Leo thought of Simon Finch. Simon wasn't physically imposing, but he had a quiet intensity and a methodical brain that excelled at logistics. He worked a dead-end job managing inventory at a warehouse, a position that vastly underestimated his capabilities. Simon was a planner by nature, someone who found comfort in spreadsheets and schedules. He approached life with a calm, analytical demeanor. The sheer scale of the heist intrigued his organizational mind, the challenge appealing to a part of him stifled by mundane routine. He grilled Leo on the specifics, poking holes suggesting refinements. His calm, calculating presence added a layer of strategic depth to the growing conspiracy. To round out the core team, they needed muscle, not for violence. Leo was adamant about avoiding confrontation, but for nerve men who wouldn't buckle under the immense pressure, who could handle the unexpected and follow orders without hesitation, Leo and Marcus identified two more from their shared past, Noah Shaw and Jake Riley. Both were known quantities men who had faced down challenges before, albeit of a different nature. They were physically capable, possessed steady hands, and crucially held unwavering loyalty to Leo. They understood the risks implicitly, but trusted Leo's leadership to see them through. When presented with the plan, their commitment was almost immediate, driven by a combination of trust and the intoxicating promise of escaping their own financial struggles. With the full crew assembled, Leo the mastermind, Marcus the right hand, Ray the driver, Simon the logistician, and Noah and Jake, the steady hands, the planning intensified. Leo transformed from a dissatisfied employee into a focused field commander. He drilled them relentlessly, using makeshift layouts sketched on warehouse floors, timing every movement. He leveraged his insider knowledge, revealing the precise moments guards took their 15-minute breaks, the exact window during the late-night shift change when the facility's vigilance would be at its lowest ebb. 30 minutes. Leo reiterated constantly, his voice low but firm, cutting through the tension during their clandestine rehearsals in the rented warehouse on the city's outskirts. We have exactly 30 minutes from the moment we breach the inner door until the next guard rotation begins. Not 31, not 35, 30. Every second counts, no wasted movements, no hesitation. He detailed the plan for the U-Haul. Its plainness was its camouflage. He instructed them meticulously on avoiding contamination gloves at all times, hairnet-specific instructions on how to wipe down surfaces, how to dispose of every piece of clothing, every tool, every shred of potential evidence immediately after the job. We leave nothing, he stressed, his eyes scanning each man's face. Not a fingerprint, not a fiber, not a footprint. We become ghosts. The rented warehouse became their proving ground. Under the stark glare of bare bulbs, they practiced entry movement through simulated corridors, the sequence for accessing the vault based on Leo's knowledge, though they couldn't replicate the actual locks and the rapid loading of dummy weight into duffel bags. Every step was choreographed, every contingency discussed. What if a guard returned early? What if an unexpected alarm tripped? Leo had answers, backup plans for his backup plans. His confidence was infectious, a steadying force that calmed the frayed nerves of the others. They saw his meticulousness, his unwavering focus, and they began to believe not just in the plan, but in its architect. In the final days leading up to the chosen night, September 12th, the tension became almost unbearable. A physical presence in the room whenever they gathered Leo, however, seemed to thrive on it. He conducted final reconnaissance drives past the Apex facility, his gaze sweeping over the familiar structure, searching for any last-minute changes, any deviation from the patterns he had memorized. He appeared calm, but Marcus, who knew him best, could see the tightly coiled energy beneath the surface. The night before the heist, Leo assembled them one last time. They met not in the warehouse, but in the back room of a quiet, unassuming bar owned by a distant relative of Simon's. The air was thick with anticipation smoke and the low murmur of the city outside. Leo didn't raise his voice. He simply went over the plan one final time, step by critical step, confirming each man's role, reinforcing the timing, the procedures, the absolute necessity of flawless execution. This is it. He said, his gaze locking with each man's in turn. This isn't just about the money. It's about taking control. It's about changing the game. Tomorrow night, we walk in invisible and we walk out rich, but only if we stick to the plan. Every detail, every second. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. No mistakes, no surprises, just precision. There were few questions. They had been drilled into near robotic efficiency. As they filed out of the bar, dispersing silently into the Los Angeles night, an unspoken pact hung in the air. They were standing on the edge of a cliff, about to take a leap of faith based entirely on Leo Vance's blueprint for audacity. Each man walked away carrying the heavy knowledge that in less than 24 hours, their lives would be irrevocably altered. They would either be millionaires, architects of the perfect crime, or they would be fugitives, ghosts haunted not by the darkness, but by the long, unforgiving arm of the law. The die was cast. September 12th, 1997, the digital clock on the van's dashboard flipped silently past midnight. 12:15 a.m. Los Angeles exhaled a weary sigh, the relentless energy of the day finally yielding to a fragile nighttime calm. The streets around the Apex Security Transit Facility were deserted, bathed in the sickly orange glow of sodium streetlights that did little to dispel the deep shadows pooling in alleys and doorways. The air hung heavy and still. Into this quiet tableau rolled the anonymous U-Haul truck engine murmuring headlights dark. It came to a halt just beyond the perimeter fence line, perfectly positioned according to Leo Vance's meticulous plan. To any insomniac observer gazing from a distant window, it was nothing more than a late-night delivery or an early morning pickup utterly unremarkable. But inside, the atmosphere crackled like static electricity before a lightning strike. The five men, Leo Vance, Marcus Cole, Ray Donovan, Simon Finch, Noah Shaw, and Jake Riley Ray stayed with the truck initially ready for the getaway, were clad in dark, nondescript clothing heads, covered hands sheathed in thin leather gloves. Their faces barely visible in the gloom were masks of intense concentration. The months of planning the endless rehearsals, the whispered conversations, it all funneled down to this single point in time. Leo took a slow, deliberate breath, centering himself, pushing back the frantic butterflies attempting to take flight in his stomach. He scanned the faces of his crew, giving a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The unspoken message was clear. Execute precisely. The side door slid open with a well-oiled whisper. Leo, Marcus, Simon, Noah, and Jake slipped out, merging instantly with the shadows. They moved with a fluid, practiced urgency across the empty lot towards the facility's less conspicuous rear entrance. Getting inside was paradoxically the easiest part. Leo stepped up to the reinforced steel door, his gloved fingers moving with practiced confidence over the electronic keypad. He punched in the sequence, a code he wasn't supposed to know gleaned from observation and his privileged access. A soft electronic thunk and the lock disengaged. He turned a key, another perk of his position, and the heavy door swung inward, opening onto the cool, sterile air of the building's interior. They were in. Inside the facility was a labyrinth of hushed corridors lit only by the eerie green glow of emergency exit signs and the occasional sweep of a motion-activated overhead light. Every sound seemed amplified in the stillness. The soft scuff of their rubber-soled boots on the polished concrete, the almost inaudible rustle of their clothing, the harsh rhythm of their own breathing. They moved like wraiths following Leo's lead through the maze. This was where Leo's intimate knowledge became paramount. He guided them along a path carefully charted to exploit the known blind spots in the security camera network. He knew the sweep patterns, the dwell times, the exact moments when a camera panned away, leaving a brief window of invisibility. They timed their movements to these electronic blinks, slipping past dormant workstations and silent security checkpoints like ghosts navigating the gaps in reality. One by one, they navigated the unseen pathways deeper and deeper into the heart of the beast toward the vault. The vault door loomed before them, a monument of thick, impenetrable steel, radiating an aura of absolute security. Multiple locks time, delays, reinforced hinges. It was designed to repel armies, let alone a handful of thieves. But Leo had the keys both physical and digital. Working quickly, efficiently, his hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins, he manipulated the complex locking mechanisms. He entered codes, turned tumblers, inserted keys in the precise sequence he had memorized. The clicks and whirs of the mechanism releasing sounded deafening in the charged silence. Finally, with a heavy resonant clunk, the bolts retracted. Leo gripped the large wheel handle and pulled. The massive door swung open with surprising smoothness, revealing the inner sanctum. For a heartbeat, they froze. The sight before them defied easy comprehension. Stacks upon stacks of cash, bundled neatly banded by color, according to denomination. Green rivers of 20s, deeper oceans of 50s, imposing mountains of $100 bills. It filled shelf after shelf, pallets groaning under the weight of pure, unadulterated wealth. The air itself seemed thick with the scent of ink and paper, the silent promise of escape power and untraceable freedom. It was an overwhelming, almost surreal tableau, more money than any of them had ever seen, more than they could truly process. But there was no time for awe. The clock was ticking. The relentless 30-minute countdown had begun the moment they'd passed the inner security threshold. Now, Leo whispered, his voice cutting through the spell. They moved with sudden coordinated speed. Noah and Jake, designated packers, grabbed the empty heavy-duty duffel bags and began stuffing them with bundles of 50s and 100s, the highest value-to-volume ratio as Leo had calculated. They worked frantically but methodically, ignoring the smaller denominations. Marcus and Simon stood guard just outside the vault entrance, peering down the dimly lit corridors, listening for any sound, ready to signal at the slightest hint of trouble. Minutes bled into each other. The only sounds were the rustle of cash, the zipping of bags, and the ragged breathing of the men working against time. The sheer volume of money was staggering. Filling the bags took longer than anticipated, each one becoming almost too heavy to lift comfortably. The initial thrill was rapidly being replaced by the physical strain and the mounting pressure of the ticking clock. Leo kept glancing at his watch, his face illuminated briefly by its faint backlight. 20 minutes gone, 25. 5 minutes, he hissed. The last few bundles were shoved hastily into the already overflowing bags. Zippers strained as they were pulled shut. Move now. Hoisting the incredibly heavy bags onto their shoulders, grunting under the unexpected weight, they began the tense journey back. Every step felt heavier now, burdened by both the physical load and the immense psychological weight of their haul. They retraced their steps through the silent corridors following Leo, their movements still precise but fueled by a desperate urgency. The fear of discovery was a palpable thing clinging to them like the humid night air. They reached the rear entrance without incident. Leo checked the corridor one last time before pushing the door open. Outside, the night was still silent, undisturbed. Ray Donovan had maneuvered the U-Haul closer, engine idling almost silently, rear doors already open. Working quickly, they heaved the bags into the back of the truck, the dull thuds echoing slightly in the stillness. The last bag loaded, they scrambled into the passenger compartment, pulling the side door shut. Ray didn't hesitate. He eased the gear shift into drive, checked the mirrors reflexively, and pulled the U-Haul away from the curb as smoothly as if he were leaving a routine delivery. He navigated the side streets, expertly merging seamlessly onto a larger thoroughfare, becoming just another anonymous truck moving through the sleeping city. Inside the cab, a wave of near-hysterical relief washed over the men. They exchanged wide-eyed glances in the dim dashboard light. They had done it. They had breached the fortress, taken the treasure, and vanished into the night. $18 to $9 million, the biggest cash heist in U.S. history. A surge of pure, unadulterated euphoria threatened to bubble over. But even as the first giddy waves of success hit them, a colder realization began to seep in, settling like ice water in their veins. Looking out at the receding lights of the Apex facility, Leo Vance knew with chilling certainty that stealing the money was only the first act. The truly difficult part, the part that would test their nerve, their discipline, and their loyalty to the breaking point, had just begun. Getting away with it. That was a whole different war. The U-Haul rumbled through the pre-dawn darkness, a metal beast carrying an impossible secret. Inside the cab, the initial adrenaline spike began to recede, leaving behind a strange cocktail of elation, disbelief, and a rapidly growing undercurrent of dread. Ray Donovan drove with focused precision, his eyes scanning the mirrors, his hands steady on the wheel, navigating the transition from industrial corridors to the quieter, sleepier residential outskirts of Los Angeles. Beside him, Leo Vance stared straight ahead, his mind already racing miles beyond the physical escape, calculating the next, far more perilous phase. In the back, Marcus, Simon, Noah, and Jake sat amidst the bulging duffel bags. The silence, thick and heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional nervous shift of weight. The sheer physical presence of nearly $19 million in cash radiated a palpable energy, a mixture of intoxicating promise and terrifying risk. Each man was lost in his own thoughts, grappling with the enormity of what they had just accomplished and the terrifying uncertainty of what lay ahead. Had they really pulled it off? It felt surreal, like a dream from which they might violently awaken at any moment. After what felt like an eternity but was likely less than an hour, Ray turned onto a dark, unpaved access road, the truck's suspension groaning over the uneven ground. He cut the engine, and the sudden silence was almost deafening. They had arrived at the designated safe house, a small dilapidated warehouse at the edge of a forgotten industrial park rented months earlier by Leo under a meticulously crafted false identity. Its corrugated metal walls were streaked with rust, its windows boarded up, it screamed neglect and anonymity exactly as intended. Working with a hushed urgency, they slid open the rear doors and began the arduous task of unloading the duffel bags. Each bag felt impossibly heavy, a dead weight pulling at their shoulders and arms, the physical burden of their newfound fortune. They formed a quick chain passing the bags into the dark cavernous interior of the warehouse. The only illumination came from a single bare bulb dangling from a rafter, casting long distorted shadows that danced nervously across the dusty concrete floor and stacked bags. Once the last bag was inside and the truck door secured, they gathered around the hall. Piled haphazardly on a collection of old metal tables, the duffel bags seemed to sag under their own weight. One bag had split slightly at the seam, revealing tightly packed bricks of $100 bills. The sight was mesmerizing, obscene in its sheer volume. $19 million, enough to vanish, to start over, to live like kings, enough to attract the kind of attention that could bury them forever. For several long minutes, no one spoke. They just stared the flickering bulb reflecting in their wide eyes, the silence amplifying the frantic pounding of their own hearts. Leo Vance was the first to break the spell. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. His voice when he spoke was calm, measured, regaining the authoritative tone of the operations architect. "All right," he said quietly, his gaze sweeping over the crew. "We did it. Phase 1 is complete, but listen closely because this next part, this is where 99% of crews screw up. This is where it all falls apart if we're not smart. Disciplined." He gestured towards the bags. "This isn't Monopoly money. It's real. It's heavy. And right now, it's the most dangerous thing in our lives." He then laid out the rules, reiterating the plan they had agreed upon, his words sharp with emphasis. "Each of us takes our share tonight. You get it out of here. Stash it somewhere safe. Somewhere nobody knows about but you. Think smart. Multiple locations if you can. Don't keep it all in one place." He leaned forward slightly. "And then you disappear back into your life. Nothing changes. You go to work tomorrow like any other day. You pay your bills like always. No new cars, no fancy watches, no sudden trips to Vegas. Nobody quits their job. Nobody starts flashing cash. We need to let this cool down. Months. Maybe longer. The feds will be tearing the city apart, looking for this money. Any unusual spending, any deviation from your routine will put a spotlight right on you." The division of the money was a tense, almost reverent affair. Under Leo's direction, they unzipped the bags, the scent of ink and linen filling the air. They worked methodically, creating separate piles, counting and recounting bundles with gloved hands. The sheer act of handling that much cash was intoxicating yet terrifying. Each man eventually stood before his individual fortune, a staggering sum exceeding $3 million. They stuffed the bricks of bills into their personal duffel bags, the canvas straining. Holding their share, the weight felt different now. Less like a burden, more like a dangerous, electrifying secret. Leo watched them, his expression unreadable. Laundering this, it has to be slow, painfully slow, small amounts, untraceable channels. We'll discuss methods later carefully, but for now, the priority is invisibility. Blend in. Become boring. He paused, making eye contact with each man again, and minimal contact between us. No phone calls unless it's a critical emergency using burners we haven't even bought yet. No casual meetups. We're connected by this, but publicly we barely know each other. Understood. Heads nodded solemnly around the room. The initial euphoria had completely evaporated, replaced by a heavy sense of responsibility and a dawning awareness of the tightrope they now had to walk. They understood the logic, the necessity of patience and discipline, but the reality of sitting on millions while living unchanged lives, constantly looking over their shoulders, began to sink in. One by one, they shouldered their individual bags, the weight now both a promise and a threat. They exchanged brief, tense nods, the last vestiges of their operational camaraderie. Then, melting back into the pre-dawn gloom, they dispersed in different directions, swallowed by the vastness of the city, each man utterly alone with his fortune and his fear. As the last man disappeared, Leo Vance remained in the now empty warehouse for a long moment, the single bulb casting stark shadows around him. He had orchestrated the perfect heist, a masterpiece of planning and execution. They had gotten away clean. But as the silence pressed in, a cold unease settled deep in his gut. He had planned for every contingency, every technical failure, every security measure, but he couldn't fully plan for the unpredictable variable human nature. Greed, fear, impatience, carelessness. These were the enemies now. They had pulled off the impossible, but Leo knew the real fight. The long, nerve-shredding war of attrition against discovery had only just begun, and the first cracks could appear anywhere, anytime from the least expected quarter. In the immediate aftermath of the Apex Security Transit heist, an eerie calm settled over Los Angeles, or at least over the lives of the 6 men who now carried its impossible secret. Days bled into weeks. The sun rose and set. Traffic choked the freeways. Life went on with its usual relentless rhythm. On the surface, Leo Vance and his crew slipped seamlessly back into their routines, becoming unremarkable cogs in the vast machinery of the city once more. They went to work, paid their bills, mowed their lawns, attended family gatherings. They performed normalcy with painstaking care. But beneath this carefully constructed facade, a corrosive anxiety began to eat away at each of them. the psychological fallout of their audacious crime spreading like a silent contagion. For Marcus Cole, Leo's oldest friend and confidant, the world transformed into a landscape fraught with hidden threats. Every passing car seemed to slow just a little too much. Its driver's face obscured potentially an unmarked police unit. Every unfamiliar face in a crowd held the potential menace of an undercover agent. Every news report about the ongoing investigation into the Apex heist. Now a media sensation sent jolts of ice through his veins. Sleep offered little respite, haunted by fragmented nightmares of sirens, flashing lights, and the cold click of handcuffs. He found himself constantly scanning faces, jumping at sudden noises, the millions hidden away in a cheap storage unit across town, offering no comfort, only a constant gnawing fear of discovery. The silence demanded by the plan became an echo chamber for his paranoia. Ray Donovan. The wheelman found his relationship with the familiar streets of LA irrevocably altered. Driving once a source of income and mundane routine now felt like navigating a minefield. Every police car spotted in his rearview mirror triggered a surge of panic, his hands gripping the wheel until his knuckles turned white. He drove with exaggerated caution, obsessively obeying every traffic law, terrified of a random stop for a broken taillight that could somehow unravel everything. He began avoiding freeways and major boulevards, sticking to winding side streets and neglected back roads. His internal map rerouted by fear. The city he knew, like the back of his hand, suddenly felt alien, hostile. His share of the fortune hidden beneath the floorboards of his modest home felt less like a key to freedom and more like a time bomb ticking silently beneath his feet. Simon Finch. The meticulous logistician outwardly appeared the most composed. He approached hiding his share with the same methodical precision he'd applied to planning the heist, securing it in a series of anonymous safe deposit boxes under different carefully constructed aliases. He maintained his dreary warehouse job, stuck to his predictable routines, projecting an aura of unwavering calm. But inwardly, he was just as consumed by the corrosive fear. Every casual conversation felt like an interrogation, every question loaded with hidden meaning. He found himself overanalyzing glances, interpreting silences, convinced that somehow people knew. The logical mind that had helped orchestrate the crime now worked overtime, constructing terrifying scenarios of exposure. Even Noah Shaw and Jake Riley, the steady hands chosen for their nerve, felt the pressure mounting. They were less prone to outward displays of anxiety, but the constant vigilance, the need to suppress any hint of their newfound wealth, wore on them. The easy camaraderie they once shared with Leo and Marcus felt strained, replaced by an awkward silence, the enormous unsaid thing hovering between them. And then there was Leo Vance, the architect. As the mastermind, he felt the weight more acutely, the responsibility pressing down on him relentlessly. He knew that any mistake, any crack in the facade would ultimately trace back to him. He took paranoia to an art form. His share of the money was dispersed across numerous locations, hidden behind layers of false identities and intricate security measures that would have impressed his former employers at Apex. He deliberately distanced himself from his usual haunts, curtailed contact with friends and family, and enforced near-total radio silence, with the crew understanding the inherent danger in communication. He spent sleepless nights replaying the heist minute by minute, scrutinizing every detail, searching for any overlooked flaw, any potential loose end they might have missed in the heat of the moment. Had they wiped down every surface? Was the disposal of the U-Haul truly untraceable? The perfect crime felt increasingly fragile, vulnerable to the unpredictable variable of human error. The thrill of success had long faded, replaced by the cold, constant dread of the hunter becoming the hunted. The enforced isolation intended to protect them began to fester, breeding suspicion. They had all sworn adherence to the rules, but locked in their individual prisons of fear. Doubts began to surface. Was everyone else being as careful? Could someone crack under the pressure? The trust that had been the bedrock of their operation started to erode under the relentless acid of paranoia. Each man began to view the others not just as accomplices, but as potential liabilities. The first tangible crack appeared one rain-slicked night when Marcus Cole, overwhelmed by anxiety and sleeplessness, broke protocol. He used a disposable burner phone, one acquired after the heist as per Leo's delayed instructions, to call Leo, his voice tight with panic, seeking reassurance, needing to hear that they were still safe. The call achieved the opposite effect. Leo, instantly wary and irritated by the breach, reminded Marcus curtly of the rules, his tone cold and sharp. Keep your distance. No unnecessary contact. Stick to the plan. Marcus hung up, feeling more isolated and terrified than before, the brief connection only serving to highlight the chasm that had opened between them. A few weeks later, another tremor shook the fragile pact Ray Donovan, perhaps seeking a small, tangible reward for the immense risk he'd taken, made an impulsive purchase. It wasn't a car or jewelry, but something smaller, expensive custom rims for his old pickup truck. It was a minor indulgence, easily explained away, perhaps, but word travels in tight-knit circles. When Leo somehow got wind of it, he confronted Ray not in person, but through a carefully coded anonymous message delivered via a third party. The message was glacial. Stick to the rules. No deviations. This is your only warning. Ray, chastened and fearful, immediately removed the rims, but the damage was done. The incident sent ripples of unease through the crew, deepening the fissures of distrust. If Ray could slip up on something small, what other mistakes were being made? Life after the heist became a bitter irony. They had risked everything for financial freedom, for a chance to escape the constraints of their ordinary lives. Yet, now they were more trapped than ever, prisoners in a gilded cage of their own making. They possessed millions, but the money was unusable, a toxic asset that brought only anxiety and sleepless nights. They had traded the prison of mundane routine for the prison of constant fear. The weeks stretched into months. The initial discipline began to fray at the edges. The bond forged in shared history and criminal enterprise weakened under the psychological strain. They were 6 men bound by an extraordinary secret, but increasingly isolated, suspicious, and haunted by the ever-present specter of discovery. The perfect crime was only as strong as the imperfect men who committed it, and the cracks were beginning to show, threatening to splinter their carefully constructed world apart. All it would take was one more slip, one careless moment, one loose thread pulled by the patient, relentless hands of fate, or the FBI. Months crawled by, each one marked by the same low hum of anxiety beneath the surface of normalcy. The initial intense fear hadn't vanished, but for some of the crew, it had mutated into a kind of weary vigilance. The immediate threat of discovery seemed to have passed. The massive FBI investigation into the Apex heist generated headlines but appeared stalled, lacking concrete leads. A dangerous sliver of complacency began to edge into the paranoia, particularly concerning the smaller everyday uses of cash. It was impossible, after all, to live entirely without spending money, and the slow, painstaking process of laundering millions was proving more complex and nerve-wracking than anticipated. For Marcus Cole, however, the fear remained a raw, open wound. The isolation gnawed at him. Leo's cold dismissal during their brief phone call had only amplified his sense of being adrift. While the others seemed to settle into the uneasy rhythm of their double lives, Marcus felt increasingly brittle, stretched thin by the constant need for secrecy and the crushing weight of the unspendable fortune hidden away. He tried to adhere strictly to Leo's rules, using only small amounts of clean cash, painstakingly separated from his main stash for daily expenses. But the stash itself remained a source of both temptation and terror. The mistake, when it came, wasn't born of arrogance or extravagance, but of simple human carelessness, fueled by exhaustion and distraction. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus was running errands, his mind preoccupied with a looming bill and the lingering unease that was his constant companion. He stopped at a local electronics store to buy a replacement part for his aging television, a mundane purchase, nothing that should have raised eyebrows. He needed about $60. Reaching into the glove compartment where he kept a small emergency fund, he realized it was empty. Annoyed and not wanting to make a separate trip to an ATM, which always felt risky, he made a fateful split-second decision. Back at his apartment before leaving, he'd quickly grabbed a small stack of bills from one of the bricks in his hidden storage, easier than trying to peel off individual notes in a hurry. He'd stuffed it into his pocket, intending to separate it later. Now standing at the checkout counter, flustered and wanting to finish the transaction quickly, he pulled out the stack. He counted out the required amount plus tax. What he failed to notice in his haste and distraction was the simple, innocuous-looking rubber band still cinching the remaining bills in his hand. It wasn't just any rubber band. It was an Apex Security transit band marked with a specific, faint ink code used internally for bundling cash within their vault. a tiny detail Leo Vance himself might have overlooked in his meticulous planning, assuming all bands would be removed or simply blend in. Marcus handed over the cash, took his change and the small electronic part, and walked out oblivious to the invisible thread he had just trailed behind him. The banded bills Marcus used eventually made their way from the electronic store's register to its nightly bank deposit. There, during routine processing, a sharp-eyed bank teller trained to notice anomalies spotted the unusual rubber band on the stack of 20s. It wasn't a standard bank band. Curious, she set it aside according to procedure. Later, during a secondary check, the faint ink code was recognized. Apex Security Transit had circulated alerts about their specific banding after the heist, hoping for just such a break. This wasn't just an odd rubber band. It was potentially a direct link to the stolen 18 to 9 million. The information traveled swiftly up the chain, landing like a thunderbolt on the desk of FBI Special Agent David Miller. Miller was the lead investigator on the Apex case, a seasoned veteran with a reputation for methodical persistence and an almost obsessive focus on detail. The Apex heist had become a high-profile thorn in his side, a perfectly executed crime that had left investigators with frustratingly few leads for months. They had interviewed countless Apex employees, including, ironically, a seemingly cooperative Leo Vance. Early on, analyzed security protocols, chased down dead ends, but the perpetrators had vanished like ghosts, leaving no forensic trace. Miller felt the pressure from his superiors and the public, the audacity of the crime mocking his efforts. When the report about the Apex banded cash surfaced, Miller's instinct screamed, this was it. This was the break he'd been waiting for, the first tangible crack in the thieves' wall of silence. A rubber band seemed insignificant, a breadcrumb, but Miller knew that investigations like this often hinged on such minute details. He immediately diverted resources, ordering his team to trace the exact origin of that specific deposit. The investigation shifted into high gear. Miller's team descended upon the electronics store, meticulously reviewing transaction logs and hours of grainy security footage from the day the deposit was made. They cross-referenced times, receipts, and customer descriptions. It was painstaking work, like searching for a single face in a stadium crowd. Days turned into a week of intense scrutiny. They analyzed footage from nearby businesses, ATMs, traffic cameras, slowly, methodically casting a net around the time and location of the transaction. And then they found him, a grainy but clear enough image from the electronics store's overhead camera, a man matching the teller's vague description, paying with a stack of cash, his face turned towards the lens for just a crucial second. Using facial recognition software and cross-referencing databases, they put a name to the face, Marcus Cole. A quick background check revealed nothing overtly criminal, but crucially, records showed he was a long-time acquaintance, a childhood friend of one Leo Vance, the former Apex Regional Safety Inspector whom Miller remembered from the early interviews. The connection clicked into place with chilling significance. Agent Miller felt a surge of controlled excitement. He didn't rush. He knew patience was key now. They couldn't spook their target. He ordered immediate, discreet 24/7 surveillance on Marcus Cole. Teams of agents began tracking his movements, logging his calls from listed phones, at least noting his routines, his contacts. They watched, they waited, letting Marcus unknowingly lead them further into the conspiracy. The net, invisible but strong, was beginning to tighten around the first member of the Apex heist crew. The ghosts were about to materialize. For weeks, Marcus Cole lived under an invisible microscope. The FBI's surveillance was relentless yet meticulously discreet. Unmarked cars parked blocks away, agents blending into the background at coffee shops he frequented, subtle tracking of his vehicle's movements, court-authorized monitoring of his known communication lines, a web of patient observation woven around his increasingly anxious existence. Marcus felt the paranoia acutely, that sixth sense screaming that something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint the source. He attributed it to his own guilt, the constant fear playing tricks on his mind. He remained oblivious to the professional eyes watching his every move, waiting for a slip, a connection, any piece that would strengthen the emerging picture. Agent David Miller oversaw the operation with unwavering focus. His team compiled detailed logs. Marcus's predictable commute to a low-paying warehouse job, his infrequent solitary visits to the storage unit where his fortune lay hidden, his lack of any extravagant spending. They noted his nervous energy, his tendency to check his rearview mirror constantly. Critically, surveillance teams documented a few brief, almost furtive encounters. A tense, wordless exchange with Simon Finch in a parking lot. A quick, awkward nod shared with Ray Donovan at a gas station. Nothing overtly incriminating, but these interactions confirmed the link suggested by the initial background checks, reinforcing Miller's belief that Marcus Cole was indeed connected to a larger conspiracy tied to Leo Vance and the Apex heist. Miller knew they couldn't wait indefinitely. Surveillance was costly, and while they were building context, they lacked the smoking gun needed for direct charges related to the heist itself beyond the rubber band transaction. The risk was that Marcus or his associates would get spooked and go deeper underground or destroy evidence. Weighing the options, Miller made the call. It was time to bring Marcus Cole in. They had the rubber band connecting him to the stolen cash, the surveillance footage of the transaction, and the documented associations with other persons of interest, including the former Apex employee, Leo Vance. It was enough leverage Miller hoped to break him. The arrest was executed flawlessly, designed for maximum surprise and minimal fuss. On a gray Thursday morning, as Marcus walked from his apartment building towards his beat-up sedan, two dark government cars materialized silently at either end of the street. Four agents clad in standard FBI windbreakers approached him calmly but purposefully. "Marcus Cole," one asked, flashing a badge. Marcus froze, his face draining of color, his heart instantly hammering against his ribs. The vague paranoia he'd lived with for months suddenly coalesced into sharp, terrifying reality. He didn't resist as they informed him he was being detained for questioning regarding a federal investigation and guided him into the back of one of the cars. The world seemed to tilt sideways, the mundane street scene dissolving into a nightmare. The interrogation room at the FBI field office was small, windowless, and deliberately sterile. A steel table, 3 chairs, a faint smell of disinfectant. Marcus sat hunched in one chair, shivering slightly, despite the room's temperature. Across the table sat Special Agent David Miller, flanked by another silent agent taking notes. Miller's demeanor was unexpectedly calm, almost gentle, but his eyes held a steely resolve that belied the soft tone. He started slowly asking routine questions about Marcus's life, his job, his finances. He brought up Leo Vance, casually inquiring about their friendship, how long they'd known each other. Marcus mumbled responses, trying to appear cooperative while his mind raced desperately, trying to figure out how much they knew. Denial was his first instinct. He knew nothing about any heist. Leo was just an old friend he barely saw anymore. Then, Miller shifted gears. He slid a clear evidence bag across the table. Inside was a single rubber band, faded green with a faint ink marking. "Recognize this." "Marcus?" Miller asked quietly. Marcus stared at it, his blood running cold. He shook his head, but his eyes betrayed him. Miller followed up with a grainy photograph, a printout from the electronics store surveillance footage. "This you paying at the register, TechZone Electronics, October 17th. Marcus's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. Miller laid out the evidence piece by methodical piece, the store transaction, the deposit records, the bank teller's report. The confirmation that the rubber band was specific to Apex Security Transit, used only for cash bundled inside their vault. He produced surveillance logs detailing Marcus's movements, his brief meetings with Simon Finch and Ray Donovan. He spoke about Leo Vance's position at Apex, his access, his knowledge of the facility. "We know," Marcus Miller said, his voice still calm, but now carrying an edge of implacable certainty. "We know about the U-Haul. We know about the night of September 12th. We know about the $18.9 million. Marcus's facade began to crumble. The pressure of the secret he had carried for months, the constant fear, the isolation, it all became too much. Tears welled in his eyes. He saw the years stretching before him. Federal prison, his life ruined, his family disgraced. Miller leaned in, slightly softening his tone again, offering a potential lifeline, the classic interrogator's gambit. "Look, Marcus, you're in deep, very deep, but right now, you're the first one in this room. How this goes for you depends heavily on what you do next. Cooperation. It goes a long way." He let the implication hang in the air. It was the final straw. The carefully constructed dam of denial burst. A choked sob escaped Marcus's lips. Then the words started pouring out, haltingly. At first, then, in a torrent of confession relief, warring with utter despair, he admitted everything. His recruitment by Leo, the meticulous planning, the roles of each member. Leo Vance as the mastermind, Ray Donovan driving Simon Finch, coordinating logistics, Noah Shaw and Jake Riley providing support. He described the heist itself, the entry bypassing security, the overwhelming sight of the cash in the vault, the tense escape. He detailed the division of the money at the safe house, the rules for staying hidden, the gnawing fear that followed. He confessed his own mistake with the rubber band, the lapse in judgment born of stress and distraction. Agent Miller listened patiently, his expression unchanging, while the other agent's pen flew across the notepad. Marcus Cole's confession was the key, the Rosetta Stone that unlocked the entire Apex conspiracy. With his detailed statement corroborated by the evidence they already possessed, the FBI now had probable cause to move against the entire crew. The dam had broken and the flood was immediate. Armed with Marcus's testimony, FBI teams mobilized across Los Angeles. Simon Finch was apprehended leaving his warehouse job, his calm demeanor finally cracking under the weight of handcuffs. Ray Donovan was pulled over in his personal vehicle offering only stunned silence. Noah Shaw and Jake Riley were picked up at their respective homes within hours of each other, both visibly shaken but cooperative. The net closed swiftly around 5 of the 6 conspirators. Only Leo Vance, the architect, remained elusive, having seemingly vanished the moment the first arrest likely hit the Whisper network. But his freedom, Miller knew, would be short-lived. The biggest cash heist in U.S. history executed with military precision had been brought down by a single rubber band and the inevitable frailty of the human element under pressure. The ghosts had been flushed from the shadows. Now, they would face the scales of justice. Leo Vance's time as a fugitive proved predictably short. Despite his meticulous planning and layers of contingency, the full force of a nationwide FBI manhunt fueled by the detailed confessions of his former crew was overwhelming. He was tracked down 2 weeks after the others found holed up in a nondescript motel on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, living under yet another alias. When the heavily armed tactical team breached the door, they found him sitting calmly on the edge of the bed, packed bag at his feet. He offered no resistance, his expression unreadable, almost serene, as if he had been waiting for the inevitable conclusion. The architect of the $18 to $9 million Apex heist was finally in custody. The trial of Leo Vance and his 5 accomplices became the media event of the year. The sheer audacity and scale of the crime, America's largest cash heist, captured the public imagination. Courtroom sketch artists worked furiously, reporters filed daily dispatches, and cable news channels provided endless commentary. The defendants were alternately portrayed as daring anti-heroes, challenging a faceless corporation, or reckless villains driven by pure greed. Every detail from their coordinated movements inside the vault to Marcus Cole's fateful mistake with the rubber band was dissected and sensationalized. Inside the packed courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. At the defense table sat Leo Vance, flanked by his expensive, sharp-suited lawyer Arthur Kendrick. Leo remained a figure of quiet composure, his face an impassive mask as the federal prosecutor laid out the damning evidence: surveillance footage, financial records, the marked rubber band, and most devastatingly, the detailed confession of Marcus Cole. Arthur Kendrick, renowned for his skillful courtroom maneuvering, faced an uphill battle. He couldn't realistically deny the heist occurred. Instead, his strategy focused on mitigation. He highlighted that the crime, while audacious, was essentially non-violent. No shots were fired, no guards were harmed, precautions were taken. He attempted to paint a picture of men driven by desperation and circumstance, appealing subtly to the jury's potential empathy for the struggles of ordinary life. But Leo's own demeanor often undercut this narrative. His lack of visible remorse spoke volumes. One by one, the other crew members took the stand, their testimonies painting a grim picture of ambition, curdling into fear and regret. Marcus Cole was visibly haunted, his voice often thick with emotion. He described the crushing paranoia that followed the heist, the sleepless nights, the way the money felt like a curse rather than a blessing. He spoke of lost friendships, betrayed trust, and a life irrevocably broken by a single night's gamble. Ray Donovan, the driver, appeared shaken, his testimony punctuated by nervous tremors as he recounted the adrenaline of the escape followed by the suffocating anxiety. Simon Finch, ever the pragmatist, initially presented his involvement with a detached, almost clinical air, but even his composure fractured under the prosecutor's relentless cross-examination. revealing the fear beneath the surface. Noah Shaw and Jake Riley offered quieter testimonies, largely corroborating the sequence of events, their faces etched with resignation. The climax, however, was Leo Vance's own testimony. A hush fell over the courtroom as he walked confidently to the witness stand. Here, for the first time, the mastermind spoke publicly. He didn't apologize or plead for mercy. Instead, he offered an explanation rooted in years of perceived slights, stifled ambition, and resentment towards a system he felt had undervalued him. He spoke of his time at Apex Security Transit, the frustration, the sense that he was capable of more. He described the meticulous planning, almost proudly detailing the intellectual challenge, the thrill of outsmarting the seemingly impenetrable system. His words were articulate, even compelling in their own way, but devoid of remorse. To the jury, it sounded less like a confession and more like a justification, an arrogant defense of the indefensible. After weeks of testimony and legal arguments, the jury's deliberation was swift. The evidence anchored by Marcus Cole's confession and the tangible link of the rubber band was overwhelming. They returned guilty verdicts for all 6 defendants on multiple counts, including conspiracy, bank larceny, given the federally insured nature of the cash likely held at Apex, and money laundering. The sentencing hearing followed soon after, the judge citing the unprecedented scale of the theft and Leo Vance's role as the unrepentant mastermind handed him the heaviest sentence, 24 years in federal prison. Marcus Cole, whose confession was crucial but whose mistake triggered the downfall, received a sentence reflecting his cooperation, though still substantial. Ray Donovan, Simon Finch, Noah Shaw, and Jake Riley received varying sentences, generally ranging from 10 to 18 years depending on their perceived roles and level of cooperation. As the sentences were read out, the finality of their fate settled over the men. Some stared blankly ahead, resigned. Others seemed to harbor a simmering bitterness, perhaps directed at Leo, perhaps at themselves, perhaps at the fortune that had promised freedom but delivered only chains. The conclusion of the trial didn't end. The public's fascination. Documentaries were produced, books were written, exploring the psychology of the crew, the meticulous planning, the fatal flaws, and the enduring allure of the perfect crime. The Apex heist became a modern fable, a cautionary tale about the corrosive nature of greed and the hubris of believing one could orchestrate a flawless crime against insurmountable odds. For the men themselves, the transition to prison life was a brutal reality check. Leo Vance, accustomed to control and intellectual superiority, found himself stripped bare, reduced to an inmate number within the rigid, unforgiving hierarchy of the federal prison system. The respect he commanded as a mastermind vanished, replaced by the monotonous grind of prison routine. Early wake-ups, menial tasks, lockdowns. He adapted as he always did, with a quiet, simmering intensity, perhaps finding a new, albeit grim system to analyze. But the life of freedom and influence he had craved was now an unattainable dream, glimpsed only through bars. Marcus Cole found prison to be a continuation of the isolation that had plagued him since the heist. He largely kept to himself, haunted by his role in the crew's capture, the weight of his mistake, a constant companion. He spent his time reading, reflecting, seeking a quiet atonement in the solitude of his cell. Simon Finch, true to his nature, adapted pragmatically. He accepted his sentence and sought structure within the system, participating in educational programs, becoming a fixture in the prison library. For him, perhaps the rigid certainty of prison offered a strange kind of peace compared to the constant anxiety of living with the secret on the outside. Ray Donovan struggled deeply. The loss of freedom. The mundane realities of prison life compared to the open road he once knew plunged him into despair. He replayed the events endlessly, tormented by the choices that had led him there. Noah Shaw and Jake Riley served their time with quiet resignation, fading into the background noise of the prison population. Years turned into decades. The men aged, marked by their time inside the 18 to 9 million they had stolen, most of which was eventually recovered by the FBI through Marcus's confession and subsequent searches, became a distant, bitter memory. They had risked everything for a fortune, believing they could outsmart the system and control their destinies. They had meticulously planned for every external obstacle, but had fatally underestimated the internal ones: the corrosive power of fear, the fragility of trust, the unpredictability of human error, and the simple, enduring weight of conscience. The perfect heist was ultimately undone not by sophisticated technology or brilliant detective work, but by a single rubber band and the inescapable complexities of the human heart. Their quest for freedom had led them to the ultimate confinement, leaving behind only a stark lesson about the true cost of ambition untethered from morality.